We have a pandemic of anxiety. We have a pandemic of school refusal at the moment. I would say predominantly young people are coming in because they are so anxious they can't walk through the door of school. Yeah. There's been a few factors. COVID was one that I think has really impacted that, and you might see this in your own practice. But I think they're losing their ability to sit in awkward spaces because they have a mobile phone.
This podcast is part of the GK Media Studios Creators Network, helping people tell their stories. Become a storyteller today and learn about our podcaster network at gkmediastudios.com.
Welcome to Psychology with a Sparkle. This is episode 3, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Padraig Danaher, who's a mental health senior occupational therapist and a mental health coach. Is that right?
Yeah, positive psychology coach, mental health coach. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So welcome, Padraig. Delighted to have you here.
Thank you so much.
I thought maybe we might start with just if you can fill people in. There's obviously very strong, I'm saying to you, this very strong Cork accent coming through, but you're not actually originally from Cork.
No, and people usually say that to me straight away, like, oh, proud Cork man here. I'm from Clare. So I'm from Clare originally. I moved to Cork about 14 years ago now to study and eventually start my own private practice up there. So yeah, living in Cork, when I moved to Cork, I studied social care and worked in that field for about 8 years. I worked in residential home with teens and who might have been in foster placement, and that broke down. I also worked in a family assessment unit as well, where we were assessing parents' capacity to parent. So really interested in that trauma piece, that early attachment piece. And then I studied occupational therapy, and I then did a master's in positive psychology and coaching, and then I started my own practice.
Okay.
And that's what I have now. I'm the OT coach in Cork. I have my own practice, 3.5 years, and I deliver interventions for teenagers and adults who are struggling with their mental health.
Okay, fantastic. And is it like mixed in terms of like males, females?
You might see a lot of the social media content is maybe more male related, but my clients are 50-50. I think people are eager to ask me more about men because maybe men weren't getting as much attention in that space. So, but I would say 50% of my clients would be female, and then it's around 50 as well, even with teens and adults. It's around that. I have a lot of adults on my caseload at the moment, but it's pretty much down the middle. If I can calculate them in my mind, it's nearly bang 50%.
Okay. Yeah. Because I thought I was doing a podcast myself, which went live yesterday, was it, or earlier in the week? And the two guys I was doing it with, they were asking me like that, which a lot of people are interested in, around the whole kind of difference between males, females, and, you know, how people present, how people deal with mental health difficulties. Would you notice in terms of the teenager cohort or young adult cohort, is there much of a divide in that sense?
I would say so. I would say even my therapeutic approach is different because I think they're seeking different things. I think for males, they're seeking to lean more into like, what's my role? Who am I? How can I fulfill a positive role? And I think for females, they need to be, I suppose, held in the space where they're at and validated in that process. Men as well. But I think the males that are coming in feel completely lost and confused about who they should be and who they should be. Identity is massive with men. Massive. They just feel like there's so much attention given to negative male figures like the Andrew Tates and so forth. And they're like, should I be that? I kind of think. And definitely if there's younger, 14, 15, 16, they're all about that. Older men aren't, but then they're often lonely and feeling isolated, feeling disconnected from life, friends, jobs, future potential partners. That's would be very common. Females as well in that sense as well.
Okay.
But I think it is different. They come in with different challenges and they seek a different style of approach. Some men don't want to lean into the talk therapy side of things. They're just like, but what now? Yeah.
So it's that kind of solution focused
very much so
style. Yeah. In terms of your specialisms, I know that trauma is obviously an area that you work in a lot, and sensory attachment. in terms of trauma, what, if anything, have you noticed, like in recent years, is presenting, that more so than may have been before?
I think our awareness around trauma is, and I don't know if it's my echo chamber and I'm surrounded by that information, but I think our awareness around trauma and where it sits in the body is really coming to light. The likes of having Gabor Mate, he's fantastic. So I think he's bringing that awareness. Stephen Porges as well, the polyvagal theory and understanding that. So I think there's a real shift in understanding that many of our bodily responses aren't, there's no cognitive awareness around that. So when that comes to our fight and flight or freeze response, and if it's leaning into aggressive behavior, if it's that complete disassociated disconnect, that these aren't cognitively made by us. It's not our prefrontal cortex making these decisions, that our body is massively impacted by trauma. So how do we support the body rather than just trying to talk our way out of it? And I think thanks to the likes of Stephen Porges, Bessel van der Kolk and Gabor Mate, I think they're really opening up that body connection piece and making it a bit more mainstream, which is great, because there's a lot of people that are trying to come in and talk themselves out of the problem when actually physically it's within their body.
Yeah, and that your head isn't kind of separate from your body. You can't kind of keep the two. We operate as one unit, as a holistic unit. And actually, as you're talking there, have you read that book, The Body Keeps the Score? Which is kind of, that a lot of trauma is held in the tissues and the cells in the body,
And when he was looking at the therapeutic recovery, how he emphasized yoga more so, and it was developing that connection piece. He said, no, there was many that he was looking at from a cognitive perspective as well, but he said one of the greatest ones over medication was yoga. It was just that connecting piece, connecting our breath. And when it comes to, from the lens of an occupational therapist, we're really interested in vestibular input. We're really interested in proprioceptive input, and that's really how our body's connecting. So vestibular, that balance piece where we actually can activate those through yoga moves, through those poses, that proprioceptive feedback, which is really down regulating. Again, we can activate that through yoga and breath work, like that connecting to the breath. So it's really resetting the body from when their body is in that fight, flight, freeze. Everything is off, and we can bring, if they are overstimulated or understimulated, we can either bring them up, we can upregulate them, and we can downregulate them through those movements. So it's a lovely piece. And I think when it comes to trauma, talking about it, if they don't hold shame over it, we can sit in this space where we want to talk all the time about trauma, and we just keep them in this space of horror, like this a horrible event. So it's like talking about the past is so important if they hold shame, so that they can identify this was me. And then once that is unpacked, it's like, who am I now? And how am I leaning into that future self? So I do think like talk therapy it's vital in that process of recovery. But once they've moved past that shame piece, it's then time to lean into. So a person will come into the clinic and they will say, I'm not happy with my life. And I will be looking at what's happening in their life that they're not happy with. I'll be looking at their identity and their role that they want to lean into. I'll be looking at the environmental factors that are stopping that. I'll be looking at the occupation, so the activities that they want to lean into, what's happening that they can't do that. But most importantly, I'll be looking at the person. And I'll be looking at lifestyle changes. So I think a psychologist could cover these, but movement, food, sleep, and I suppose much of our reading and our research would be on lifestyle changes around this. So we'd have a lot of awareness on that, and how are their social connections, and are they living a life that's meaningful to them, and what's stopping them from doing that. So we kind of break down that's one of my models that I use, and that would be a positive psychology model as well. So that's from my lens, where I think it's very much strengths-based, value-based, future view. Like, what are we doing to lean into that future self? And I don't know, but my experience with my own personal therapeutic journey was a lot of changing past patterns that I was stuck in, my mindset around things that might have happened in the past that brought me distress. Psychology supported me around that. That's not my specialty. I open that space and I will validate somebody's feelings, but that isn't my clinical background. My clinical background is strengths-based values, future goals, and really assessing environments and really assessing, like, if they're saying this is where my house is, I'm breaking down what that looks like. What is stopping you from leaning into it? Looking at every aspect of their life, not just them.
Okay. So you'll refer somebody to a psychologist, we say, for that specific clinical
Absolutely.
piece. Yeah.
Some people will come into me and they will be in a really low state. And I had a young man in the other day and huge grief, lost his father. And we were speaking about positive occupations and leaning into that positive identity. But every time he was leaning into this space, he was met with grief and sadness. He needed that support. He needed that specialist psychology support to really unpack where he was. My approach in that space wasn't enough. You know, it was like we were trying to patch it over with positivity, where actually he needed to sit and go through that grief properly. So in that context, I referred him on to psychology, and I would work then with a lot of psychologists and psychiatrists. And they would refer a young person to me if they needed them to become regulated before they could engage in the cognitive work. So I would do those meaningful occupations, get them in a space where they could become regulated and they could activate that prefrontal cortex, that problem solving, because without regulation, that isn't active. So if they're in that fight, flight, freeze response, you can't get them in a clinic to sit down and talk about their emotions.
Sure.
They're completely dysregulated.
Sure.
So that's where I would come in then and do my work. Then they would go back to psychology and then do that cognitive piece, and then they could come back. So occupational therapists, and I like using the words meaningful occupations and occupations a lot, but occupations, for most people, think it's employment status. Occupations is everything we're doing. So we're sitting on a chair, I'm engaging in occupation. I sleep is an occupation, food is an occupation, having a conversation, all of these, we're occupational human beings. We are by doing. So I would be looking at what's meaningful for them, and they may not have meaning in it. So meaningful occupations might be activities, is another way. Yeah. So getting them out on
activities of daily living.
Absolutely. So like if they're having issues engaging in community, integration, having friends, moving their body, exercising. I can't ignore the basics when somebody comes in. If somebody comes in and they're completely dysregulated and they're unwell, and I'm trying to problem solve what that looks like without addressing the fact that they're living on monster drinks, they're not sleeping, they haven't exercised in months, and they're just on their phone for 16 hours a day. I'm wasting my time trying to, you have to address the foundations first.
Sure. And in terms of that technology piece, you know, is that like for that again, is it more pronounced for that younger cohort that you're kind of more focused on?
Yeah, and I'd have a real interest in it. So I think it's the number one of two things. Parents come in, they want their child to sleep better and also get up out of bed on time. Yeah. But also they want them off their phone as much as they are. So we are like, there's huge research, and there's a great book, The Anxious Generation. And I think it's really prevalent for parents to read. And it speaks about the research of mobile phone use and the detrimental cost that it's having on young people. And we have a pandemic of anxiety. We have a pandemic of school refusal at the moment. I would say predominantly young people are coming in because they are so anxious they can't walk through the door of school. Yeah. There's been a few factors. COVID was one that I think has really impacted that. And you might see this in your own practice. But I think they're losing their ability to sit in awkward spaces. Because they have a mobile phone. Like we go through our lives for years just being awkward, like standing in a queue. This is kind of awkward, surviving it, going into different kind of areas. Now we have our little comfort blanket, our mobile phone. And we're just leaning into this dopamine rich box that we carry to just make us feel good all the time. But actually we should just be feeling awkward and weird and uncomfortable and navigating our emotions around that. So now when young people are leaning into a space that is what might be seen as slightly uncomfortable, it becomes so uncomfortable that they can't actually sit in it. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think one of the other implications is, things like ADHD. Yeah. And I know that you have your own experience of ADHD. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. And again, I think it comes back to talking about the foundation. So ADHD is It's very prevalent, and I'm glad it's getting the attention. I know there's so much social media around it now that in some ways it dilutes it, but it also helps young people identify that maybe this is me, this is where I'm at, without having to pathologize it. A lot of parents might be coming in worried that they don't want to give them the diagnosis in case a young person uses it as an excuse that I can't do anything now because I have ADHD. I don't believe that's the case at all. I understand the struggles to it, but I think there's lots of research around entrepreneurs, and many of them have ADHD. It's that hyperactive, like, what are we going to do? That creative piece. There's some beautiful strengths within ADHD, but the school environment doesn't serve someone with ADHD. And they're in an environment where they don't have an ability to hold attention to tasks that they have no interest in. That's it. That is school. That is every single day. So it's really debilitating for them. And one of the common things that I am seeing coming in time and time again, that is really the forefront of what I work with ADHD, is rejection sensitivity dysphoria. So it is young people who are hearing that they get up in the morning, why can't you just be organized? Why can't you do this? Where's your bag? Where is your this? Why do you keep spilling your water? So their morning is met with that kind of like, you're not good enough, you're not capable. They're in a school setting for 8 hours. They're told the same. So they spend their lives constantly being told, why can't you? And they're sitting in a room with neurotypical people, watching them sit and study and be able to hold attention to tasks, do their homework, put their bottles in the bag with the twisty top and not spill it everywhere. And they can see. So they have this experience in their world that I'm not good enough, and there's nothing that I can do to be good enough. And I think it is just, it's heartbreaking. And every then little critique, i.e., could you put your cup in the sink,
becomes a criticism.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
And you see the bodily response then, it's just a blow up. So that is, I think, predominantly what I support young people with, versus maybe just supporting them around organizational skills. Because I think we have it wrong if that's where we want to come in. It's like just giving someone with dyslexia tips around just read better. It's not that they don't know how to organize, it's an inability to. So, I think sometimes when you're just saying, here's some organization skills, I'm like, they know, they see the person with the perfect folder. They want to have that. It's an inability to. So I think it's sitting in that space, understanding, really validating their experience, their lived experience, and supporting them around that.
Absolutely. And it is, I think it's become increased. There's so many like adults being, because it was always like confined to, being a diagnosis being received during childhood, whereas there's so many people now as adults being diagnosed as being on the autistic spectrum and having ADHD. And oftentimes the two go hand in hand.
I couldn't agree more. You would see that when someone with a diagnosis with autism, you would see often the ADHD diagnosis there too.
Yeah.
Much more adults as well leaning into that space.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is great that they can get that support.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there is probably, I think going forward, there will be more of a focus on that kind of neurodivergent approach, as opposed to, as you said, neurotypical, that one size fits all. Because, I think the sooner that we kind of cater to the fact that everyone is so different in terms of their learning styles and in terms of how they interact with the world,
it becomes a more accepting and beautiful world. And I don't want to positive psychology it by, it's a superpower or their strengths, because they have tons of challenges that come with it. Sure. Someone with ADHD will have issues around socializing, will have issues with sensory processing, will have issues with auditory processing. And that inability to hold attention to tasks can be difficult. There's tons of stuff, but there is beautiful stuff with it as well. There is. If I had the choice to have it or not, I would choose to have it if I have all of the ambition and drive and creativity that I currently have. It's worth the price to pay.
And at what age were you diagnosed for?
I was an adult as well.
Adult. Okay.
Like, I was actually a clinician and people were coming in with ADHD and I was like, this is very familiar. I was like, is this a problem for people? They're like, and I can't hold attention for more than like 15, 20 minutes. I was like, can anybody? I keep forgetting my things. My bottle is always open in my bag. I was like, isn't everybody's. And there was a lot of this. I was like,
Sure.
oh, I should probably, and to reflect back, like I was an early school leaver. I really had a lot of difficulty sitting still. And my first few jobs, even like I was 15 when I left school and started working in jobs, and I just couldn't sit. And so like it didn't take me long to put on the detective hat and kind of join the dots that, yeah, it was a clear pattern. And I dyslexia as well, so I really struggled with even reading and writing, but I kind of led it into that I was just a hyperactive kid, but it was an inability to sit still.
And did that make you quite socially anxious, growing up?
It made me
'Cause
it made me have a
you
really
don't seem to be socially anxious now.
no. I had a really poor image of myself growing up as a child. I always knew there was something wrong, and intellectually I struggled because from a school perspective, you were judged off your academic performance. So from a societal perspective, you're judged off your academic performance. So if you were scoring low, you think that this is where you stand in society.
Yeah.
And it makes me emotional when I hear young people come through the door and they feel like they're not worthy because they scored poor in a test, exams that we really shouldn't have. Like we just need to look at like, what are we judging a young person on? And when they have these talents that are incredible musicians coming through the door, actors, like these are like incredible people. They can write poetry, like, but maybe they can't handwrite things down properly. They can't do maths. There's dyscalculia. So I don't know if I was socially anxious. I think there was probably some anxiety there, but I think I had a poor self-image until I started working, and then I could see my capabilities. I was like, oh, I'm getting on really well in work. Yeah, I was like, oh, every job that I had, I thrived in. And then it probably took years of that positive interaction to overcome maybe the early childhood experience. But as soon as I entered back into college as an adult, that little boy was there, that nervous, anxious, like, because I was back in that environment again. So my body was like, what's happening? Because I was so confident. And then I was like, head down, quiet, shy. I was like, what's going on? But it was all that academic performance. Like, it's like time to prove yourself from an academic perspective.
Yeah.
My first assignment that I wrote, I hadn't read books, and my lecturer called me to the side and he's like, do you know how to write academically? And I was like, yeah, I wrote it down. He's like, and he started reading out he's like, you wrote, so yeah, man. And I was like, yeah. He's like, that's how you speak. He said, you write differently. I was like, okay, how do I do that? He's like, you got to read. I was like, okay. And it was just that kind of difference. But
that learning piece.
But so there was a lot of reading.
But like, it's like that thing of like, we don't know any better until we're told.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
Yeah.
100%.
And I think, what you were saying there about, if there, like, we've all had like something, we'd say, growing up at some stage that has caused, whether it's trauma with a big T or a little t, that has impacted us in some way. And that, when you start entering the world of personal development, that kind of takes you on a different trajectory. But at a moment's notice, that little boy or little girl can come back, be triggered, so it's to have that awareness piece as well around, would you agree with that? Or
I couldn't agree more. And I think you said it so well. And it's for me, I've done lots of inner child work growing up, but even that, they never go, and sometimes we soften the voice of that
inner critic.
But they're ready to be seen at any time. And I think as much the work that I've done on myself as an adult is really trying to recognize that young boy that wasn't seen, and how does he get seen now? How is his needs being seen as I have now entered into adulthood, and what does that look like? Because the moments that he isn't seen or isn't validated or abandoned or whatever that might look like, those are their visceral emotional responses. They come back because that little boy is like in there just needing it and screaming loud, why can't you hear me? So it's a really powerful piece. And I think for those who haven't leaned into understanding inner child work, it's a beautiful therapeutic journey. Very powerful. Very emotional. But it's worth doing, checking in with that young person.
And was that, because obviously there's still lots of, and again, I don't mean to kind of like separate the men, but it is more difficult oftentimes for men to kind of seek the support that they need, even though they might be aware of maybe quite a profound trauma history. So like,
I agree.
It obviously took a lot of courage for you, and now even to be able to talk so openly about what you've experienced and kind of gone through, and come out the other side and still on your journey, as we all are.
Never ends.
Yeah, so like, I'm sure that's very inspiring when you're talking to young men in particular, or middle-aged men or older men. I'm sure men of all ages.
Yeah.
So could you talk a little bit maybe from the male perspective specifically? Yeah.
And I agree. I naturally, in my experience, females are just better at that social connection. They're better at opening up from an emotional perspective. And whether it's because they just are in general, just have that innate, or they are more comfortable with embracing that side of them. Men, on the other hand, are not. They find it really difficult to socially connect. They find it really difficult to be vulnerable. They find that if they lean into the emotional piece and they cry, or they express sadness, anxiety, worry, that they're less of a man, and maybe they don't want to lean into what might be seen as maybe more feminine attributes, even in different roles that they might take. So I think it's a lovely piece for them to come in, and I would express that I would lean into both feminine and masculine style roles, but also to express crying and what that looks like, and to be really like this. There's a few people that I follow online, and I really like those strong men that cry and just say like, absolutely. There's a guy I was following recently, and you could see him just expressing this level of gratitude and welling up, and it's like, this is such an important message. Piece. Oh my God, for other guys to cry and just to say like, it's okay, because they're lonely, and I would always say that I'm at ease when a man walks through the door, versus the men that don't reach out for help and they're the ones I worry for. But the men that come through the clinic and they're willing to sit in the space, I immediately settle. Like, even if if they're openly saying about suicide and talking about maybe things that they would have done in the past, but the fact that they're leaning into therapy, I can relax. But there's many men out there that I fear, and if they're listening to this, just to reach out and ask for help. And the more vulnerable we are, we're so embarrassed to be vulnerable, we're so ashamed to be vulnerable, but we never look at someone being vulnerable and think, oh my God, they should be ashamed of themselves, they should be embarrassed. Every time anyone looks at somebody who is willing to open up about their emotions, I think people look at them and admire them.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we fear that space.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that, because like that, I was listening to that, back to that podcast that I was saying went live the other day, and we were talking about that exact thing, and I was saying that, even like as females as well, sometimes that vulnerability piece can be hard for us all, but obviously it's more pronounced with men. But that the more vulnerable you allow yourself to be, the more attractive actually you become. Agreed. Like in terms of like connection, because like that, more than likely somebody else, either whether they're listening in or whether they're having a conversation with you outside of this podcast, they will have a similar experience, if not exactly the same, so I think that's the thing that we forget sometimes, that, we're humans at the end of the day, and we experience the whole spectrum of emotions, and that a lot of the stuff that we experience throughout our lives is shared.
I agree.
Yeah.
And I think like it really opens up that beautiful space for true connection as well, when two people can be vulnerable, because the masking and portraying a version of ourselves is, we don't elicit real connection. Like I to be honest, you should nearly fear connection in that space, because somebody is connected to a version of yourself, not actually you, a version that you're portraying, not the true you. So when we are super vulnerable and we do allow that in, and I want to hold weight on the fact that if we're rejected in that space, how absolutely heartbreaking it can be, and how if we are shunned or not accepted, it is not an easy process to go through. But the importance of living as true to yourself as you as you can? And if you can't, how do we become resilient in that space that we can feel like I can actually lean into my true self? Do you see a difference in your own practice with women and men in that space?
Yeah, I mean, like obviously I think across the board men definitely struggle more, like in terms of, I was going to say self-expression, but they're probably quite capable of expressing in other areas of their lives or other parts of their character. But when it comes to kind of expressing emotion, that piece sometimes gets suppressed. I think it's more pronounced with men.
Yeah.
But as I said, it is you know, there's lots of, again, it's back to that, what you were saying earlier about that environmental piece and how we were, you know, how we were schooled, how we grew up, the environment, what was kind of the family dynamic.
What were the family dynamics?
Yeah.
Were emotions accepted?
Absolutely.
Were they embraced? Did someone say, shh, be quiet, sit in the corner, now's not the time? If that was your experience growing up, or being put
stiff upper lip.
Yeah, absolutely. Like what does that create as an adult, or the naughty steps, and you know, like sit there until you're not feeling those emotions and you're able to come back at the table. Like I just think there's so many negative messages that we send, and some of it is still in that mainstream psychology. It has faded. I think that I'm kind of anti the putting a baby until they, you know, cry themselves to sleep. I just don't. It makes me uncomfortable even at the idea of it. But even the naughty steps and all of them, they're all spaces where a person is trying to connect with somebody, and their body is reacting in a way, and they need to be held and validated and allowed to express those emotions. Their behaviors can be spoken about, but their emotions should be absolutely able to be expressed.
And you have a little girl yourself.
I do.
So has your kind of knowledge and experience of occupational therapy and positive psychology, has that helped you in terms of your parenting?
It has. And I think even like when it comes to, like, as a clinician, I'm giving parental advice all the time. I'm saying these are things, but I also say I am a father, and I know when my daughter falls over that it's important for me to step back and let her figure it out. How's she going to navigate getting back up? But the father instinct in me wants to go over and be the hero of the day and hold her and say, I'm brilliant, see, I saved you. So there's an inner battle, and it's a battle between your heart and your head all the time. So there's definitely tons of knowledge. I've watched my daughter flourish into a really confident, strong 7-year-old little girl who is incredible. And I really feel like I've leaned into that space for her to allow her to figure things out, and also just to really validate those feelings when she is, like, 'cause she comes, and it's a beautiful thing. If your child comes in the door and they're really upset because they can't find their favorite teddy, that you have created such a beautiful environment for your child, that this is their biggest problem. You know, there's many kids out there, and trust me, they're not worried about their teddy. They're worried what they're going to eat or what that looks like. So I think it's really important to validate that, and name behavior as well. Like, kids are trying to figure out the world, and actually we're all trying to figure it out as well. But that conversational piece where there is emotions and they are upset and they want to kick off or do whatever, let the emotions come out and talk about then the behaviors that come with that, and how do we adapt it to be, to manage themselves. But it's all parenting, and that process. It's a learning, and it's a fine dance of trying to get things right, and you never do. It's kind of winging it and hoping for the best.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think when you have that awareness around, you know, it's what you model, and how it's not what you say, it's what you do. You know,
I couldn't agree more. Yeah. And they're watching all the time. Yeah. How you act, how you speak to other people, how you speak to yourself, the food you eat, whether you go for, like, whether you exercise, whether I go for, there's a 10K loop and my daughter comes with me for a cycle, and there's a little gym there, and she will always stop at the gym for us to do pull-ups and then go on, and like her lived experience is watching, this is what adults do. They play as well. This is normal every day. This is normal. This is what we, and I think it's really important, because it's very difficult to be critical when we don't engage in the behavior. And I also think there's huge expectations for teens to self-regulate or young people to self-regulate, and I really don't like that. We co-regulate. We as adults co-regulate. We need another person to connect with and to feel safe and to feel heard and to regulate with. So I think it's really important that we don't have these huge expectations, these huge expectations for teens and kids that they're supposed to, manage all their emotions and self-regulate, when I would say most of my adult friends cannot. Emotions are there to be expressed.
Yeah.
Let them out. Do not try and suppress them, because they'll come out, but they'll come out in ways
in a bad way.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Another, I suppose, area or focal point in terms of your specialisms, Padraig, is sensory attachment. So for people who don't know what sensory attachment is, can you break it down quite simply?
So we interpret the environment through our sensory systems. So touch, feel, taste, smell would be very common for people to be like, oh yeah, that's my hearing. I know all of those sensations. We also have 3 others that OTs are very interested in, and that is interoception, vestibular system, and proprioception. And that's around, our interoception is around how we feel within inside us, our body, how our body functions. Our heart, our using the needing to go to the bathroom, not needing to go to the bathroom. And then we also have our proprioception, which is when our muscles are activated, how we feel that environment. And then our vestibular system is around balance and that spatial awareness. So we're constantly interpreting the world through the environment that we sit in. And young people who've been impacted by trauma interpret the world in a different way. So their sensory systems aren't sending them the signals that maybe everybody else is receiving. So that's the part I'm really interested in. And some of them are seeking that real deep pressure touch and to actually feel. And some of them will engage in aggressive behavior to actually just feel it, to push, to shove. So I think it's understanding from a sensory perspective, it comes back to that body work. So if a young person has experienced trauma, how do we treat the body versus just trying to treat the mind? And young people in general, connecting their emotions to their behaviors is quite challenging. So I think even for us to try to understand that, I don't think we can talk our way out of these issues without addressing like what's happening in their body. Why are certain things triggering these bodily responses? And how do we support them around that? So much of my learning would be around that and other trauma work. But SAI would be within the social work department, where they're supporting a lot of young people who have experienced trauma. They're very interested in that particular model because they've seen great success for young people recovering through trauma by that application of that model. And
in terms of kind of specific interventions and treatments, then what?
I would see young people would come to me. Trauma therapy is relationship therapy first and foremost. If they don't feel safe in the presence of another human, the only way of doing that is allowing that space to exist. So I think trauma therapy is all about rebuilding that relationship. So the key component is using yourself. So that therapeutic use of self and using your nervous system to soothe theirs. So that's why, as a therapist, and this, like when we come in stressed, like our clients feel that straight away. So we have to be what we advocate.
You have to do the work.
We have to do that. We have to go for the runs, the good food, the sleep. We know all of this. So first and foremost, I have to do all of those self-care. And then I'm looking at a young person and I'm looking at areas of their life of when certain behaviors are triggered. If it's certain seeking behaviors, or they're leaning into like a huge amount of eating food, have the ability to actually recognize when they are full. Is there stuff going on for them? Because that interoception, they may not have that signal to say stop eating now, and they're eating till they're actually full. So,
and also, sorry to cut across, the awareness piece, even being aware, like bringing awareness into, okay, I've now eaten half a packet of biscuits, like to bring the awareness piece to that.
Because they may not, and they may never have seen that people stop after half.
Exactly.
Exactly. And there's that educational piece where and having that deepened knowledge of their own lived experience, what that looked like. What are foods that bring sense of safety for them? Many young kids in care will want to sleep in a room with food because they have had an upbringing where it could be a week without. Sure. So now that it's available, they want it to be close. So it's understanding, deepening that knowledge. But for me, it's building that relationship, building that positive relationship with them, and then getting outdoors where they're moving their body and the sensory environment are supporting that regulation. So lots of green spaces, forest walk, and allowing a young person freedom to move their body. And if you watch a young person in a space where they can move their body, they tend to lean into strategies that regulate them. So if they are seeking that proprioceptive feedback, they're often going and hanging off trees, pushing trees, dragging stuff. They're just trying to regulate themselves. So now they have an environment where they can lean into that space. The ones that are really seeking that vestibular movement, you can kind of see them balancing on trees, and they're just trying to regulate themselves. So opening up the environment to support regulation is huge. And supporting, predominantly what I do is I go around the country and I work with teams of social care workers, because I was one. And I deliver training to them around what that looks like, and we problem solve. Lots of cold water exposure is across board. What I'm seeing with young people who've impacted by trauma is really good for resetting their nervous system. And it's like there's an awakening. And 8 years as a social care worker, we used to bring young people to the beach all the time, and I mean in the Baltic winter. And I'm like, this not a bother, straight in, swimming for hours and no recognition of feeling cold. Like, so what they were seeking was huge input to regulate themselves, but they were so regulated when they came home. They settled and they had a lovely day, but they needed that. So the intensity of the therapeutic intervention that they need, and it's just that awareness and constantly having that clinical lens on, and you're watching, you're like, you can see a young person from being
calmness coming over them.
It's beautiful to watch, isn't it? Like you can just see that, you're like, oh, we're here now. And then you can do that cognitive work. But if a young person is completely dysregulated and they're trying to get into that aggressive back and forth behavior, regulate them first. And outdoor spaces can allow that. But it's having the clinical knowledge to see it, to really understand it, and as you said, just to watch that like that. And it's a beautiful thing. I think I have the best job in the world. I absolutely love it. You can just to be part of this process for them is
really see the process of growth.
It's beautiful.
My last guest, Hugh Sweeney, spoke about addiction, and I'm just wondering, like in particular, like that cohort that you're describing, that you've just described very well there, Padraig, would you notice like that a lot of them would, suffer with addiction related difficulties?
I would, and it's really unfortunate to say, but absolutely a huge percentage of them. So addiction in any behavior, in any type, whether it's pornography, whether it's drug use, whether it's alcohol, we're trying to escape a feeling, and we're medicating that feeling because we're not receiving the medication or the therapeutic input in the right way, and it's easy to get that resource. I was getting a tattoo in Dublin, and the guy was talking to me about trying to get like tattoo numbing cream, and he's like, I can't get that, but he's like, you could probably find drugs more accessible here in the streets than this. He's like, unfortunately, he's like, this is, and Cork would be the same, Galway probably the same. So it's a resource that's accessible to them, and it makes them feel okay. So internally, there's a huge amount of pain and discomfort. And it's something that I've learned in the past few years. I come in a lot of time with a positive psychology lens of trying to figure out like, what are your strengths? What do you love? Let's lean into that. But tapping into the pain piece to change behavior and like leaning into that. But for them, it's we're hugely motivated to avoid pain, emotional pain, hurt, suffering, and we will do almost anything to stop that. And that's what drugs are for young people. It's like, I'm not hurting anymore, and this feels good.
Temporary relief?
Absolutely. And then it feeds into the bigger problem. So maybe their lives aren't going well, and they lean into the likes of cannabis, heroin, alcohol to feel better, and they feel better in the moment, but more parts of their life starts falling apart, and they receive more pain because of that, and their only resource is to then enhance the amount of drugs that they take. So the behavior causes pain to escalate, and then the only way to soothe that pain is more drugs, more drugs, and it's hard.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned Gabor Mate earlier, and he talks a lot, as you know, about, not becoming over-identified with yourself as an addict. It's that addiction by its nature is, it can be either any one or set of behaviors,
Yeah.
that you engage with
Yeah.
in a negative way, that provide, as you said, like temporary relief, but
Yeah.
produce long-term problems,
Yeah.
long-term difficulties. Like that piece around sustaining or kind of over-identifying with the addiction side or the addict, and making the separation between, that's just one piece. You have, like you were Padraig with
I love that.
an addiction or a difficulty
Yeah.
with alcohol or
Yeah.
drugs or whatever the case is, but you also have all these other fantastic things about you.
Yeah.
Whereas the addict can often just become identified with that one thing.
Yeah. I think that's such a powerful statement, and it's so prevalent in all of my clinical work. The identification piece, and that's why when we come in and we're identifying the problem, we can then attach ourselves so closely to it, to this victim. I have ADHD. I am an addict. It becomes all encompassing, and we forget the person in front of us, and it becomes part, and then that we hold so much shame over it. I'm an addict, and I'm so embarrassed, and that shame then further embeds it as if it is the core of us.
Absolutely.
So through those separation of expressing, saying, okay, well, this is something that I have leaned into, but this isn't me. And as soon as we can get
make
that clear
separation piece,
huge things happen. Because then I Brené Brown talks a lot about that shift from guilt and shame, and I love that, and I think it's really important. So first, to feel guilty, I don't mean accept it and think, oh, this is a great part of who I am, but feel guilty about the behavior we're engaging in, and then we can change it. I feel like crap because I did this. So you know what, I did this, but it isn't me, so I'm going to change that. Versus shame.
Exactly. And she talks about, that idea that, like, guilt is, I suppose, an emotion that allows us to kind of develop our conscience, because it's important that we do feel guilty about certain things, because it causes a change in behaviour, or hopefully it does. But the shame part, that's just the most useless emotion.
Couldn't agree more.
Because it just causes, so much distress for everybody. For the person themselves and everybody around them. And
with shame, and with men coming in with shame, when there's a sense of shame, they won't talk about it. And that's the difference between having guilt. They're more proactive to identify it. It's that separation. I shouldn't have done that. Like if I ate a whole chocolate cake and I felt guilty about it, I'd be like the next day, I'm not going to do that. I'm not buying that cake. I'm going to get out and go for a run. Versus holding a sense of shame. I'm like, I shouldn't have done that. I'm going to get another one. Nobody knows. And that's just, this is who I am. I'm just a person that does this. There's such an acceptance, and we can't come out of that. So
exactly. And I think the other presentation, probably worth teasing out a little bit, because it's definitely something that in my private work I've noticed more and more men presenting with sexual addiction, porn addiction, which you mentioned. Is that again something that you...
Huge. We talk about it a lot, and people that have been in relationships and the relationships are falling apart because they were addicted to porn, and young men who are just so isolated and lonely, and they're engaging in porn because they're like, I don't want to be alone. This is meeting the need. But their relationship with sex and sexual arousal is so misguided, because they're only becoming aroused. They're becoming aroused when they put their hands on their mobile phone, but versus putting their hands on a female. And they're becoming aroused at watching people have sex, not the engagement of a sexual act themselves. And all of that is miscued. So I think we speak about it a lot, at that open space to come in and talk about their relationship with porn. Is it positive? Is it negative? Are they doing a lot? Are they leaning into it occasionally? And I would say a lot of them are displaying addictive behaviour and addictive, shameful behaviour. So
absolutely.
That shame piece again.
Absolutely. Yeah. And sex addiction.
And sex addiction. Yeah, absolutely.
Like that, I'm just, thinking of clients are kind of popping into my head as I'm speaking, but like that, spending like so much money like every weekend on sex workers.
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
Um,
Have some of them in Cork as well.
Yeah.
There's 1 or 2 clients, and they would say, or like trips to Holland regularly to go over the red light district, and taking huge risks, having unprotected sex, coming back to their partners. So it's frightening, but I do think once they come through the door and are accepted and they're validated and recognized and seen, and they can speak about it, we can separate the shame piece, the guilt.
Yeah.
And I think that's the core.
Yeah.
Like, shame can't exist in spoken word. You know, that safe space where we can openly talk.
Yeah.
You see it softening, and then you can put in those plans to change that. But it is huge. A lot of men, and I love when they are willing to speak about it. Some aren't, and I know they're not in a sexual relationship. They don't want to speak about masturbation. They don't want to speak about porn.
Yeah.
So there's the shame is too
deeply embedded.
It's too deeply embedded.
Yeah. Yeah. So in terms of your own values, or like you've spoken about, you know, in terms of intervention and kind of the treatment side of things when you're working with people, in terms of the values, your own core values, you know, working with young adults.
Yeah.
I know, again, that connection piece is right up there at the top.
Yeah.
What else do you think is really important?
I think connectedness is key, because I think we are relational beings. We need to be in some form of relationship. Being able to express our authentic self, to really embed those relationships, and creating that identity piece is huge, and bringing some joy through the process. I think there can be a heaviness with therapeutic work, and I think we can bypass, actually, life is really beautiful. It is, they come through the door and we can hone in on these negative parts of themselves. But I don't want somebody to go through years of missing what is right here in front of us, which is beautiful connections, lovely conversations, huge opportunities to find happiness and joy in the simplicity of life. We've 80 years on this planet, and
or more,
fingers crossed, more.
Yeah.
And it's like, it would be a shame that you would want to spend 20, 30 or 40 years of them sad and not able to come out the other side, when there can be some tweaks in your mindset and viewpoint where you can then wake up every morning and see that life is really beautiful. It has tons of opportunities. And when our lens starts focusing on these, we enhance more. I work with people who are optimistic, and I work with people who are pessimistic. They live the same day. Their lens are just on the different things. One might have a flat tire, one might have, the other might have the flat tire. How they look at it is complete. Oh my God. And it's just night and day. It's like, why does this always happen to me? With like, oh God, at least I met a lovely man that helped me with the tire. He was so nice. It's like the exact same stories, like same situation, but their narrative around it is completely different. So how do we shift into more of a positive, optimistic attitude, future positive self, that amn't I so lucky that, versus why does this always happen? Because life is challenging. I'm not denying it. And I'm not saying that people can't come through the clinic and speak about those things. Yet I just don't want them to miss everything else that's here in front of them.
Yeah.
Because it's a short period. Like, it's just soak up the good times.
And I think that's one of the biggest things that holds people back in their adult lives, is that kind of victim mentality.
Agreed. And
not wanting to take personal responsibility, and that the blame shifting, you know, is like such a common theme. And that can take a huge amount of work in the initial stages to help people. And oftentimes people are very resistant to that, you know. Yeah,
I'm so interested in that topic as well, because I think when people let go of that blaming, I think they don't want to, because they're nervous that, you know, they'll hold shame. Oh, so I have my life because it's my fault. But I just think it's the most empowering sentence to say to somebody, that you are responsible for your life. This is yours. It's not Timmy down the road that had a conversation with you 30 years ago and said one thing that upset you. He is not responsible for your happiness. You are. And that is not, I don't think that's disempowering. I really think that's an empowering tool that you can give to somebody to say, like, it's great that you are responsible for your life. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, but I think it's back to that thing of, like that people feel that in some way they're minimizing themselves, or that they're in some way failing themselves or failing others by putting their hands up and saying, yeah, guilty as charged, admitting defeat on some level, and recognizing that you can actually take steps to turn that around. But the first piece, there needs to be an acknowledgement of where you're at.
I agree.
In all of that.
And it's a hard pill to swallow if you are reflecting.
Yeah.
And because of that, I would see a lot of older adults who are engaging in addictive patterns to avoid the feeling of ownership and engaging in alcohol or drugs and just not wanting to name it, to say, oh, this is me, because the pain of that might be too much. I just think I feel it's such an empowering shift. It's you're handing somebody back the key to their life, like saying, this is actually, it's all on you. Like, how beautiful is that? It's all on me. I don't need to blame anyone anymore.
Absolutely, but like, there's none of us infallible. We're all just human at the end of the day, and like, we're going to make mistakes. And,
continue to do so.
Yeah,
and even the therapeutic work that we will do. And I was having a conversation with another guy recently, and it's just a never-ending like space.
It is, yeah.
We're never there. We've never self-actualized and like, I'm finally here and I've done all the work.
No, it never happens.
Yeah,
yeah.
And it's a beautiful
work
thing.
In progress for
always
your whole life.
Yeah, always.
Yeah. But you get better at stuff. Like I always say to people, it's not that you ever become the perfect human. But you get better at dealing with stuff.
I agree, and that for me, and I would say that the likes of Tony Robbins or Jay Shetty and these like huge advocates for maybe positive psychology, mental health, the gurus in this space, they feel sadness, emotion, hurt from breakups, stress, worry. They feel all of them. You don't see it in that space. But what they have is tons of skills to move out of that state faster. That's all. But they don't deny those feelings and they will express them. So it doesn't matter all of the work that you will do on yourself. You should feel sad sometimes. You should feel anxious. These are human emotions that are going to come. Guilt is going to come. Shame is going to come. These are part of it. As you said, no one is infallible, and nor should we steer away from it. Happiness is so much more intense when we've come on the other side of hardship and we've had to work for it, that it will become very stagnant and not a beautiful thing if that's all we ever experienced, if we couldn't name it besides sadness or a hard day or a tough day at work and you come home to somebody who you love. Like those things are that's a beautiful place, but we have to go through the hardship it is.
So what, as a guy, what is the emotion that you would say you struggle with the most?
Oh, that's a great question. The emotion that I would struggle with, anger.
Okay.
Anger. Not allowing myself to feel anger. And I think that whether it's a male perspective or my perspective, but I feel if I express anger that I have lost control. I have a really negative relationship to it. And I'm 6'3" and I'm male, and I just think it's not, I would worry how people would feel if I expressed anger and what that would look like. I've tried to connect with this over the past few years within therapy, because anger is a really important emotion to feel. Anger elicits change, and I can get really upset inside angry inside a meeting, and I think it has helped me really advocate for someone's needs that aren't being met. But I think it's something that I avoid feeling. I soften it too much. So
how do you deal with it?
It's an ongoing journey. How do I deal with it? Awareness is key. Awareness to know that it is there, to know that I should allow it out.
But in a safe
way. And I allow it out because I have never been an aggressive. I've never been in a physical fight or anything like that. But I fear that anger is a loss of control, and maybe it's the loss of control that I fear versus the anger, like that I've lost it. And if I see someone expressing anger, it's often that they've lost control, and now they've leaned into that brainstem space where they're not making the right decisions and they're, erratic or whatever. So I think I fear it and not allowing that, but I think it's probably the loss of control versus the emotion itself. Interesting
Very
reflection.
good. Yeah. And it's funny actually, because as you're speaking there, I remember reading a research study, and it was like around whether or not the likes of, hitting like a punch bag or hitting pillows, that would have been classically one of the things that people would have spoken about, to kind of get your rage out on a pillow or whatever. But actually this research study was talking about, that for some people that actually incites more anger.
So interesting.
That it's not actually a release for them at all. It actually just gets them
More
psyched up even more, so.
Yeah. And I think what are we trying to connect there? That I think we're, in that sense, we're nearly trying to connect the emotion of anger with violence.
Yeah.
And that is terrible, because I think anger is a really important motivator for change. It's important to feel it. And it's, again, that space of, like, all emotions are welcome, all behaviors are not. Like, it's important to feel the emotion, how it comes out in behavior. If you want to punch somebody, you're not expressing it well.
Yeah.
How can you articulate it and say, I'm actually really angry right now, and this has made me really angry, and I would like this not to be part of my life. And I think my own trauma response would be very fawn related. So very much denying my own emotional needs.
But you become passive aggressive then with that?
Disconnect.
Okay.
Yeah. I pull back. I'll just revert.
Okay.
It's like, okay. Yeah, that's my goal.
But again, it's that, as you say, like once you know that about yourself, then at least you're in a position of power to recognize that, okay, could I deal with this in a better way, or actually am I dealing with it as best I can, for in this given moment or whatever it is, because sometimes the best response is to disengage,
for me, it's a disengage to reflect. And I always have to check in with myself in emotional spaces. Is this me or is this them? Is this a bodily response that I'm recognizing from something that would have happened in the past? Am I feeling it? Or was this actually a person who was intently trying to hurt me through their words or through their actions? So I think for me, it's like, this is my reflection piece as I come back. It's like, oh no, this was definitely a me thing. This was definitely an early childhood experience, and it triggered something within me. This isn't an actionable step that you took to elicit pain or sadness in me. But I think that takes time. Really interesting question though. Yeah, I've never been asked that. How about you? What emotion do you find hardest to connect with as a woman, or as you, as a person?
I think, again, that vulnerability piece, I think I always kind of, I suppose, my go-to is to be as capable, to do everything, myself, be as capable as possible. So
without asking for help.
Yeah, just to look for help, to look for support if I need it. That sometimes, that'd be mine.
And what would that feeling be for you then if you were to ask for help?
It just, like that. I mean, I'm better at it now than I was, I kind of learned the hard way.
Yeah.
But it's just not a comfortable space. I like that. Again, I think I just kind of feel that I should know. Do you know what I mean? I should be able to deal with this, or I should be able to handle this, or I should be able to whatever it is, but like that, sometimes I wait. If I feel safe, like that, back to the safety piece, if I feel safe enough with somebody, I will open up. But it takes a lot for me to feel safe. That sense of safety with somebody, Yeah.
I want to keep poking.
Okay.
Because I have those feelings myself, but I think that really stems to like that protection piece when you're growing up of having to do everything maybe for yourself. And for me, from a personal perspective, like having that feeling of like, I don't know, just like I don't want to ask. I just have to figure this out because there's
and
no
it's
other.
not even that I had to do everything for myself, because like I'm, the youngest of 6, and it's not that. It's just I think there was that kind of a thing of like competency. That was a big thing, that to be competent and to kind of I suppose strive to achieve your best, which again, is positive in one sense, but then I suppose the flip side of it is that sometimes you expect that level of competency from yourself all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And where do we be kind to ourselves in that process?
Yeah. But
Interesting.
It's interesting.
Yeah, really.
Yeah. So like obviously you have done a huge amount of work yourself, Padraig, which is always, it's fantastic. I think, for all of us who work, in the field of mental health, you have to do, as you were saying earlier, you have to, if you want to be good at what you do, you kind of have to do the work yourself.
Yeah.
And that doesn't make you exempt from being triggered, in
all.
everyday life. But, as we were saying earlier, hopefully the hope is that you get a little bit better, maybe, with awareness, with that level of awareness. In terms of the other values that you see as being core to doing this kind of work effectively, like obviously you mentioned the connection piece, you mentioned kind of helping people to feel at ease and to provide that kind of safe space. What else do you think is important?
Like I think when you really see somebody, and I think that's allowing that vulnerability piece, I think it's we have to release your expectations of a person and your perceptions of what you want for them. And you have to become quite small in that journey because we come with our own set of values and our own set of beliefs, and the life that I want to live, I believe is the right life for me. And I believe that I've looked at a lot of research around, health, well-being and mental health and physical health. And these are things that I do for that. I have to take myself out of that and see the other person's values to really recognize them. I have my own that help me connect with a cohort of clients, but I think it's the acceptance piece that somebody else's way of life or values may not align with mine, but I can still see and sit and support that process as well. Because that can be the case. You have your own intentions of what you think is the right way, but I think part of our therapeutic work is taking our step out of that and not allowing our own values always to influence our therapy as well.
Absolutely. And being respectful of like that, you have your own set of values, but that shouldn't preclude you from taking on the values of somebody else.
Yeah. And I think from an OT perspective, like we speak about like meaningful occupations, and sex should be a topic that we talk about, but somebody's sexual patterns or behaviors or what they lean into, healthy, not healthy, whatever that looks like, whatever frame I want to put on it. But their preference of wanting to have lots of sex with lots of different people might be something that is really meaningful for them. And how do I support them around it, whether that leans into my own space?
Absolutely.
So I think being acutely aware that your values will impact your own practice, but that you need to...
It's not a space of judgment.
Not a space of judgment is key. So because they shape our life, our strengths, our values, 100%. And positive psychology is all about like leaning into who are you, what are your strengths, what are you good at, and actually I really think helping somebody find out what their values are is I bring a lot of positive psychology to my sessions, and one is helping a person name their values, not their values that their family have for them, but their values themselves. And are they living a life that's meaningful to their values? Because I often see people trying to come in and shape an identity that they believe their parents would want them to have. But actually their actions in that identity doesn't align with who they are as a core person. And just because your parents have these values, it doesn't necessarily mean you do. And that can cause a lot of friction in the therapeutic journey. So, but values are really important to name.
They are, yeah. And I think there, what you mentioned about, you know, figures of influence in somebody's life, and that you can have a grown man or a grown woman sitting in front of you, but yet they're still carrying these limited ideas and limited belief patterns that they learnt as a child, you know, and to actually help them to realise it's okay for you to kind of, you know, inform your own mind around what are your current beliefs, you know, even though you've grown up with a particular set of.
Agreed. And I have 2 or 3 people on my caseload at the moment that maybe come from religious backgrounds, very Christian values. Their children don't take on those Christian values, and one of them is bisexual and has no permission to express that version of themselves at home, that they might want a sexual relationship with a same-sex partner. That is, and it's very difficult in that therapeutic relationship, and much of the work then is actually working with the parents in that space of allowing them to let that young person express what's going on for them.
Yeah. And
take me out of it. Like, I think an open space, a lot of times I'm having conversations that they can't have at home. And I think, like, if the parents were open to it, and I'm not saying that it's easy for parents, it's already challenging enough, but there wouldn't be as much of a need then for me.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, you know, you mentioned there around sexual identity, like that whole area, and gender dysphoria, like is, my gosh, like there's so much, I don't know if you find that, but it's
huge among, and I've had a few conversations with some other mental health OTs, and they're like, I don't really have many. I would say there's lots of them on my caseload who are going through that space where they definitely feel they don't belong in the bodies that they were born into. And that is a really tough time for them. That is a really challenging time. It really impacts their mental health because they're out in the world all the time and people are viewing them in a way that they don't align with. And it's very difficult for them. And lots of talk about hormone replacements and bans, and
so difficult to access those services.
Really hard. I don't know what it's like in Galway. In Cork, it's impossible. There is one place in Dublin, I think, but like they don't exist in Cork. And like from a therapeutic lens, it's that I think we have to lean in with a space of curiosity and acceptance and
being educated, to educate yourself.
100%. It's an ongoing learning. And I have some really amazing young people on my caseload. One I'm working with for 3 years, and they identify as non-binary. They're incredible, such an advocate, and have taught me so much. And yeah, so there's lots of learning for me. And I think upskilling
I always
as well.
say that we learn as much from our clients as they hopefully learn from us.
Massive. I would sit and just kind of soak it all in when I hear them speak of, I suppose, their experience. And then the work that I would do, like they might have a non-binary flag on their clothing, and they were like, why are they still misgendering me? And I was like, Mary, who is 65, may not have ever heard of what non-binary is. So like, while we have an acceptance of this is really hard for you in your echo chamber, and what you hear, like, you know, we should be identified as the pronouns that we choose. This is not language that Mary or Timmy down the road will have ever heard. So they may make mistakes, but I think most people will lean into kindness and compassion. Most people, some people will choose not to, but most people, when you ask or say, can you identify me as a they or them or he or she, they are pretty accommodating. My experience is people, particularly Irish people, I think are pretty accommodating.
Yeah, and getting better, I think, all the time.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. And then for us all just to be kind and compassionate and to take space in that learning as well. But it's very prevalent
it is.
in my work.
Yeah. And I think as well, again, to kind of have that acceptance piece, because like that, if somebody who presents don't feel accepted, as you mentioned, in their own families, let alone in their external environment, and they don't feel that sense of acceptance coming from you as their therapist, it's never going to work, you know?
It's never going to work. They'll be very closed off in that space.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, acceptance is everything. I actually, for me, and the feedback that I would get from my clients is when they come in and they are seen and heard and held, it's the shift in that change. It's a huge.
You can see it actually physically with some people when they walk out the door.
Absolutely,
they look like they've a couple of stone lighter.
It's mad, isn't it? And I think it's just that recognition that oh wow, I was seen today. Somebody actually saw me. So
and they may never have spoken about whatever.
And they could leave with less shame or no shame if they were holding shame over those parts. But I think that's all, that's all we want, I think. And then it comes back to that authentic connection. It's like it develops when they can finally lean into those really vulnerable parts and we see them for the amazing person that they are. They really feel like, oh, is this what true connection is? Because I've been displaying a version of myself and I'm sure I'm getting connections.
I wasn't judged.
Yeah. This is beautiful. And that's so I think there's huge power in that.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really difficult skill for therapists to learn. I think it is at the core of them or it's not. I've sat in with some clients and I've watched therapists talk in a way to portray that they're empathic or active listeners, and I'm like, oh, and the young person is just reading it. They're like, you're completely not seeing me at all, and every time I say something about one thing, you were trying to give me the complete opposite in feedback, saying, oh, would you not just have empathy for your parents, or why don't so I think it's not something that you can learn. I think the core of great therapists it's just in them to really see.
And it's having a level of detachment, like that you don't involve yourself in the person's story. And what I mean by that is, just what popped into my head there when you said, oh, can you not see it from your parents' perspective? They're obviously reflecting on themselves as a parent, and that's what's coming through in terms of how they're reflecting back to the client. Like, you have to be able to put that separation piece and detach yourself and really just see and hear the client and what's happening in their lives as distinct from how their story reflects on your story.
100%. And you can see that. And I saw that on the day there was one or two and I was like, oh, this is about you. This isn't about them, There's a young person here who's really opened up about some pretty horrendous early childhood experiences, and they were met with you trying to change their perspective on it, but this was nothing to do with them. They just needed to be seen. They were very vulnerable, but they named it straight away, which was beautiful to watch as well. They were really empowered, very, very articulate young person.
Okay.
So it was great to see.
Okay. So I suppose we're kind of coming to the end of things.
Yeah.
And seeing as this is a question that I get asked very frequently, I'm going to ask you the same question. We touched on it earlier, actually, but particularly for male listeners listening in, because obviously not only do you work in the field, but you also are very active in terms of your own personal development work. For somebody who maybe is listening, who has, a difficult history or is experiencing a difficult time, but like that, finding it hard to actually pick up the phone or to actually reach out and to look for support, what would be your advice to someone like that?
Well, I'm glad that they're listening to a podcast like this. I think this is a beautiful free resource, because mental health services are difficult to obtain. So I think the starting point is actually accessing information, seeing what connects with you, then start leading into what that might look like. But I would say to people that you're not your past, and you particularly for young men who are stuck in that circle, what type of man do you want to become, and what are the small actionable steps that you can take today to lean into that person? And I think that can be really empowering, because they can see a future version of themselves and they have no clue how to get there. And it's too far of an image but there are some actionable steps that they can take. They only have to be small, but that is going to make them feel that they're leaning into that person that they want to become. And that is a really empowering shift. So it would be looking at what are the actionable steps that you could take that your tomorrow self would thank you for, and be proud of. But what are you doing today? What can you do today that's going to make you feel like that? And as if men are listening, that it's okay to feel all of these emotions and sadness and lean into therapeutic support. It's a game changer.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
The last word lies with you. So is there anything additionally that you'd like to add to the conversation, or anything that you wanted to mention about your own work, or anything that you'd like to add?
I love this conversation. This was a beautiful conversation, and definitely thought-provoking, and even that kind of connection with emotions. And I think for people listening, for them to really connect with all of the emotions that they feel and try to see what those emotions are trying to tell them, but to try to connect with other like-minded humans, and just to understand that life is really beautiful and we have a huge power in our own hands to lean into connection, and some of it will take some work, but yeah, just the life that you could live isn't that far away. You know, they're small steps now, but it's not as far away as you think it is. So that's it, I think. And yeah, I'm on social media. You can reach out anytime. The OT Coach on Instagram, and my website as well, theotcoach.ie, and LinkedIn, same scenario. It's Padraig Danaher, the OT Coach. Any information, there's always workshops, talks, men's groups, mixed groups, anxiety, depressive symptoms, all of the above, trauma, all of those light-hearted stuff. But yeah, you can find me there. Happy to.
Fantastic. Padraig Danaher.
Thank you so much.
Thanks very much for joining me, and for driving all the way from Cork.
It was a lovely conversation.
On a terrible day. Oh my gosh. When I looked out this morning, I was like, oh God.
No, it was worth the drive.
What a day to be making a trip. But really, you've been very open, and I think that, so much of what you've covered is going to really help and inspire people. And I think it's so important that men talk as openly as you have, because so many, men struggle, as you mentioned, with expressing emotion and expressing it, and that you've highlighted the fact that, emotion doesn't kill us, even though we fear the negative emotions, but it doesn't kill us at the end.
It doesn't. Yeah. It's important to feel it.
Yeah.
It passes.
So thanks so much.
Please, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks a million.
And great. Thank you.